Today on NewsWatch, the nuclear deal with Iran is drawing criticism from around the world. It is now in the hands of lawmakers in Congress. We'll explain what's ahead. Plus, compromise. That's what a Catholic professor says will lead to fewer abortions in America. Hear why.
I've given myself to the Lord, and I've left myself in His hands, and I have trust, and I have been very, very well taken care of.
What's the secret to a long life? This 100-year-old woman says she knows. Her story is coming up later in the newscast. Thanks so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. The Obama administration and Netanyahu government continued campaigns to endorse or criticize the nuclear deal with Iran. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem now, the debate took place as Congress begins its 60-day period to review the agreement.
Both Secretary of State John Kerry and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took turns on the Sunday talk shows defending their positions.
Ronald Reagan negotiated with the former Soviet Union. Richard Nixon negotiated with what was then known as Red China. You have to negotiate sometimes with people to make the world and your country safer. And we negotiated because President Obama thought the primary challenge here was getting a nuclear weapon away from Iran, and we believe this deal does that.
There was a celebrated deal just a few years ago, a nuclear deal. Everybody, the scientific community, the international community, everybody applauded it. It was a deal with North Korea. That proved to be a historic mistake as well. And North Korea today has a dozen nuclear bombs and is on track to get, within a few years, 100 nuclear bombs. So I think that this is a repeat of the mistake of North Korea.
While Kerry and Netanyahu staked out their positions and Congress reviews the accord, crowds in Tehran shouted death to America. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei vowed Iran's policy toward what he called the arrogant United States would not change and pledged to support its jihadist allies in the region. With billions of dollars in sanctions relief, many Middle East observers fear Iran will soon be able to resupply the terror groups Hezbollah, Hamas, and the regime of Syrian President Bashar Assad. In the meantime, as one more sign of the growing tensions in the region, 47% of Israelis would support a unilateral strike against Iran's nuclear program. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Here at home, several states have ordered the National Guard to arm military personnel and facilities and recruiting offices in the wake of the gunman's rampage in Chattanooga. Indiana, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Florida are among them. Meanwhile, the mother of the latest man to lose his life made a trip to the memorial outside the military recruiting office in Chattanooga. Navy Petty Officer Randall Smith died in the hospital Saturday.
My son is a hero. He died doing what he loved. He would have it no other way.
Smith and 4 Marines were killed by Mohammed Yusuf Abdulaziz. The 24-year-old's family says he suffered serious mental illness and depression, and he was a devout Muslim. So far, the FBI has no evidence that he talked with terrorists before the attack. Another historic development in the restoration of relations between the U.S. and Cuba. Today, Cuban officials formally opened their embassy in Washington, D.C., fully restoring diplomatic relations between the nations after 5 decades of hostility. At midnight, the U.S. and Cuba resumed normal ties, and Cuba's flag was hung in the lobby of the State Department. Greeks woke up this morning to a new era. Banks finally reopened after 3 weeks of being closed, but now they face new problems. Dale Hurd is on this story.
Large lines formed outside banks in Athens as limits on cash withdrawals remained in place. This pensioner says, "I had 20 euros in my pocket when this happened. They said today that we would be able to withdraw 400 euros, but I could only withdraw 60. Greek banks closed for 3 weeks to prevent a bank run after the country flirted with bankruptcy, defaulting on debts to the International Monetary Fund as its second bailout deal expired. Now, ordinary Greeks will have to pay for austerity at the cash register in the form of a 23% sales tax on many basic goods, making almost everything more expensive in this poor nation. Pensions have also been cut. Bank customers will still not be able to cash checks, only deposit them into their accounts. and will not be able to get cash abroad with their credit or debit cards, only make purchases. For Greeks, this is not a solution, and far left-wing Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras is struggling to contain a growing revolt within his own party. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Severe weather wreaked havoc across the country this weekend. In Cincinnati, a pregnant woman and her 2 children died when floodwaters from a nearby creek swept away their trailer. 5 inches of rain in 2 hours turned the creek into a deadly torrent of water. Miraculously, her fiancé and 2 other children survived. In Colorado, lightning struck 2 people, a woman rushing to help her husband when she was hit working in the yard. His clothes burnt and tattered, his body lifeless.
He had no pulse. He was not breathing. I just started doing chest compressions right away and praying.
It took 20 minutes, but eventually he did take a breath and is expected to make a full recovery. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has set off another firestorm due to comments he refuses to back down from, this time attacking another former Republican presidential nominee, John McCain.
He's not a war hero.
He's a war hero.
He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured.
McCain, a former Navy pilot, endured 5 years of torture as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, but Trump says he has nothing to apologize for. He says McCain isn't doing enough for veterans. McCain has not commented. However, fellow Republican candidates have condemned Trump's comments, including former Texas Governor Rick Perry.
Donald Trump owes every American veteran, and in particular John McCain, an apology.
Trump did not serve in the armed forces. Donald Trump may be getting the headlines so far in this year's presidential race, but newly announced candidate Scott Walker is plugging away to make a name for himself. CBN's David Brody spent time with him in Wisconsin, with the Wisconsin governor in Iowa this past weekend, and he has more on that story.
I believe in America. I love America.
Scott Walker may come across as an average guy, but he's ready to aim much higher.
I'm Scott Walker. I'm running for president. I'm asking for your vote.
Early poll numbers put the Wisconsin governor in the top tier of a very crowded Republican field. His campaign message: reform, growth, safety.
If you made a list of common sense conservative reforms in this country, I don't think you could point to one that we haven't accomplished across the way in Wisconsin, a blue state.
That's Walker's claim to fame, a conservative governor getting results in a state that has not voted Republican for a president, at least, in more than 30 years. He's also battle-tested, winning re-election and overcoming a nasty recall effort brought on by liberals and public unions. He's built a tough reputation, even writing a book called Unintimidated. His critics think he won't compromise at all.
Some folks will say unintimidated means I'm not going to compromise. And yeah, I know you're a student of history.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan, the 80-20 model.
Right.
Do you subscribe to something along those lines?
Well, I don't think you should never compromise your principles, but in terms of the details, I mean, I think as governor, you know, when I pushed for the stuff that probably most people know me about, which was taking on the unions, I wanted 100% repeal of collective bargaining. We tweaked it a little bit. As long as you don't compromise your principles, the details, you can always work that.
That resonates with conservatives.
I think he's solid on the social issues, which in my opinion are some of the more fundamental issues of this campaign.
A pro-life candidate, Walker wants to strip federal funding from Planned Parenthood. And he's called the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage a grave mistake. And he wants a constitutional amendment allowing states to define the issue, not the courts. Then a media report implied that he and his wife might take opposite sides on the marriage issue. Walker quickly cleared up any confusion.
My wife actually supports my position, so that's something. She pointed out she was torn by the fact that she's got me with a position and she's got other family members with a different position. But being emotionally torn doesn't mean that she's got a difference of opinion.
And Walker's record shows he's no pushover. He told me that as President Walker, he would display that no-nonsense approach from day one.
I'd speak out and take an active, aggressive position to call on the Congress to fully repeal Obamacare and put patients and families back in charge and actually send up draft legislation to empower them to do that. I'd pull back on day one on the bad Iran deal we just talked about. And going forward, would make sure that we pulled back on so many of the other bad regulations under this president.
Walker wants everything he does to be grounded in his faith. As the son of a Baptist preacher, he knows a thing or two about the Bible.
You know, one of the scriptures I find to be most comforting is in 2 Corinthians 12:9, where Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh and speaks the words of Christ, saying, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." And it's just such a powerful reminder that no matter how challenging times are, his grace is more than sufficient.
That's something he'll need in what is shaping up as a long and crowded campaign. David Brody, CBN News, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Coming up, is compromise the key to fewer abortions? We'll break down why one Catholic professor says the time has come for Americans to see both sides of the issue. Ohio, Georgia, and Indiana are launching investigations into Planned Parenthood to find out if organs from aborted fetuses have been sold. Several congressional committees are also investigating the nation's largest abortion provider. Last week, a pro-life group released a video showing a Planned Parenthood official discussing monetary estimates for organs. Planned Parenthood says it does not sell fetal body parts. So, where do most Americans stand when it comes to abortion? CBN's Paul Strand recently spoke with a Catholic professor who says most Americans dislike abortions, but few want to see them all banned. He believes this fact could mean there are new chances to work out a real compromise that could lead to fewer abortions.
We're talking with Charles Camosy, who's written Beyond the Abortion Wars. Charles is a professor at Fordham University. And Charles, first tell me, why is the binary pro-life, pro-choice picture really much more complicated than what we think? That it's just pro-lifers, pro-choicers, that's it?
Well, if you just talk to enough people about abortion, you realize that those two binary categories just don't work at all. So most Americans are highly skeptical of abortion. Most Americans don't like abortion. They think it's a bad thing. Most Americans also want exceptions for like life, rape, maybe fetal deformities. So if you're that person, are you pro-life? Yes. Are you pro-choice? Yep. So at the end of the day, this kind of binary is just really unhelpful for what Americans actually think. It's also unhelpful in that it pits us against each other, right? So if you're in that camp, you're definitely against that camp, and we're in some sort of war. And my book, which is trying to get beyond the abortion wars, needed to start there, needed to say, let's just admit that it's way more complicated than this.
So now why does this give you hope?
There's a lot of hope because, again, most Americans, whether they self-identify as pro-life and pro-choice, and often has very little to do with how they actually think about abortion, right? It has to do with politics and something else. But what they actually think about abortion, there's wide overlap. People don't like most abortions, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, and people generally want exceptions for life and sexual violence, again, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice.
And there's two groups coming along that especially give you hope. Can you tell me about the two groups that you think are going to really change the debate?
Yeah, this has me really, really excited, and it's not sort of wishful thinking, it's what the numbers actually say. So the future of this country, to anybody that's paying attention, are millennials and Hispanics. Those are the people that will lead us into the next generation. And both groups are really disproportionately skeptical of abortion, really. So for instance, millennials, the Pain Capable Act, which is coming for a vote, if you ask people who are young versus people who are old, the younger people actually support the 20-week ban compared to people who are older. Hispanics as well. If you ask young people to declare whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, those that say they're pro-life are 51% of which say, I'm extremely pro-life, this matters a lot to me. Of those who are pro-choice, only 21% say that about them. So there's an intensity gap as well.
Well, now what would you say to pro-life absolutists who say any kind of compromise is unacceptable morally?
We need to make a distinction between what we argue about ethics and morality, and what we do in the public sphere and what kind of laws we push. I mean, you've been doing this job a long time. You see what happens in D.C. There's just no way that an exceptionalist bill has a prayer of passing anything and anytime soon in this town. There are things that do have a chance to pass, right? We could talk about those. But just to give you an example, if you don't have an exception for sexual violence, media, politicians, virtually anybody you talk to will immediately go there and say, we can't take you seriously because you just don't care about women who suffered sexual violence, right? And we saw that with the legitimate rape comment, right, in the 2012. Yeah. Everything was about that. Everything became about that. And so just practically and politically, we need to have those exceptions. Again, I think we need to make a distinction between the practical and the political and the moral on the other hand, though.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Charles Camosy, author of Beyond the Abortion Wars. Charles Camosy, professor at Fordham University. Thanks, Charles.
And for more on the debate on abortion and the undercover Planned Parenthood video, log on to CBNNews.com. Up next, we're going to meet a woman who is 100 years young and still going strong. Hear her secret to a long life next. Most of our health problems are said to be the result of three things: bad food choices, inactivity, and unmanaged stress. So it's no surprise Seventh-day Adventists live 10 years longer than most other Americans, because as Lori Johnson shows us, they don't do any of that.
At age 100, Benita Williber still has a healthy mind, body, and spirit.
I've given myself to the Lord, and I've left myself in His hands, and I have trust, and I have been very, very well taken care of.
She's not alone. There's an unusually high concentration of centenarians in her hometown of Loma Linda, California. It's one of only 5 so-called blue zones worldwide, areas where people live the longest. The others are Okinawa, Japan, Korea, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, and Nicoya, Costa Rica. Loma Linda is an hour east of Los Angeles. About 250,000 people live here. The reason they're so healthy is because most of them are Seventh-day Adventists. On average, they live 10 years longer than most Americans. Dr. Larry Beeson has researched this phenomenon for the last 50 years.
Adventists have approximately the same proportion of people who die of cancer, heart disease, or stroke, but the age that they get diagnosed is much later.
They strongly adhere to the belief of respecting the human body as a temple of the Holy Spirit. That means no alcohol, no tobacco, and following a plant-based diet.
In Christianity, we have the Holy Scriptures. What God said from the beginning, you should eat. He gave us the nuts and the grains and the herbs that He placed in the earth. And He said, you will do better if you subsist on that type of thing.
What has your diet been throughout your life?
Vegetables. My sister liked fruit. Well, I do too, but vegetables had priority, and I like them raw.
Many Adventists, like Benita, are total vegetarians. Others will eat a little dairy, while some occasionally consume fish. And there are those who eat small amounts of poultry and beef. These choices lead to different health outcomes.
The more flesh foods you eat, the more Alzheimer's, the more heart disease, the more cancer, the earlier the death occurs. We're going the other direction as people move toward the removing flesh food from the diet. There tends to be a delay in the onset of the diseases.
Diet isn't the only factor in these longer lives.
Seventh-day Adventists strictly observe the Sabbath. Every Saturday, they rest to recuperate from the week and recharge for the one ahead. Also, to spend time with friends, family, and God.
Stuart Hardy, who pastors one of the world's largest congregations, says resting on the Sabbath includes abstaining from electronics.
Any of those things that kind of take you back into work, you try and avoid those things. Now, it's not like it's a rule, but when you think about it, if there's anything that you're involved in during the week, if you go back to that, then you're not really taking a break from it.
I feel that rest is one of the most important things in aging. That if you rest, then you can get up and gallop.
Medical research confirms stress kills.
Science has always kind of had some kind of tension with religion, particularly in contemporary society. So it's great to be able to read something in the scriptures
They suggest what we should do, and then science is not only affirming it, but even giving us more specific understanding of why it benefits us so much.
Exercise is also a priority. Throughout her life, Benita was extremely active. Now she walks every day, but admits she doesn't have the strength she once did.
It is subsiding, and that's the way God had intended for people to be, and so I accept that too, even though I don't like it.
Adventists are able to stick to their healthy lifestyle because they're surrounded by others living the same way.
My mother used to keep us in the straight and narrow way by saying, now be careful with the company you keep. Be careful with the company you keep. Because if you keep a certain company, strange enough, it has an influence upon you.
So look to the Seventh-day Adventists, who live an average of 10 years longer than the rest of us. They exercise and observe the Sabbath. They avoid alcohol, tobacco, and meat, all within a social network that reinforces that behavior. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Beautiful. Rest now so you can gallop later. Stay with us. We're coming right back. Operation Blessing is providing shelter and building homes for orphans in Nepal. 64 children lost their home when a deadly earthquake destroyed their orphanage last April. Operation Blessing is providing temporary shelter while the teams rebuild the orphanage. You can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to its website, ob.org. And finally, this hour, I have a little bit of motivation I'd like to speak into your Monday. Consider this: God has a big vision for your life, no matter where you are in it. For many of us, though, that vision is a bit cloudy. Roadblocks, regrets, and wrong relationships can separate you from the dreams God has for you. Now is the time for you and those dreams to get reacquainted. Guess what? The gift has your name on it, and only you can receive it. And with that, make this a marvelous Monday. That is going to do it for now for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. Do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Join us again right here next time. Make it a marvelous Monday.